Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm Dr. Anthony Mazzella. On this channel, we explore the hidden, unconscious, emotional dynamics underneath narcissism. This is not just about the behavior, but about the deeper wounds, defenses, adaptations, and possible transformations one can make. This video is part of a larger series on healing narcissism. If you've ever tried to help someone change, or if you're on the journey yourself, these videos are for you. Today, we're talking about what emotional healing actually looks like for people with narcissistic traits. Not the theory, but the lived reality. If you've ever wondered how change happens, or if it's even possible, let's get right into it. How do you help someone heal when their entire identity is built around being disconnected or not genuinely invested in others? That's one of the most common questions I get when it comes to narcissistic personality disorder. To begin, we have to understand what makes someone feel disengaged in the first place. One of the core features is what we call the grandiose self. The grandiose sense of self is not just about showing off or needing attention. Grandiosity is a structure with many parts. It's made up of idealization, devaluation, emotional detachment, limited capacity for empathy, and a deep inability to truly depend on others. This structure is held together by powerful defenses like splitting, projection, denial, aggression, withdrawal, and fantasy, just to name a few. All of these defenses keep painful feelings, shame, envy, loss, inadequacy out of awareness. But they also keep the person disconnected from others and from their own vulnerability. So healing narcissism means slowly, carefully dismantling these defenses while helping build a more grounded, authentic self underneath. But before we go further, let's step back and look at how grandiosity actually shows up. Not just the flashy look at me versions, but the sneakier, more subtle forms. Because trust me, not every narcissist wears flashy boots or craves the spotlight. So grandiosity isn't always loud or performative. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, even invincible to the untrained eye. Have you ever been around someone who seemed defiant, dismissive, or controlling? But underneath, you sensed that maybe there was some fear or shame, perhaps? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever seen this kind of defensive grandiosity in action? In others, or maybe even in yourself? Let's explore a composite example that shows just how hidden and powerful these dynamics can be. Imagine a man who gets flooded with rage after receiving a phone call at work. On the surface, it seems like an overreaction. Maybe the call included a simple request, something minor, but internally, something much deeper is happening. He doesn't know how to mediate his own emotional experience. As soon as tension builds, it doesn't get processed. It's sort of like an inward explosion as he starts to attack himself, calling himself a loser or stupid or incapable. He's immediately swept into what we call an affect storm. That's a rush of emotion so overwhelming that he can't think, he can't reflect, and he can't regulate. There's no space between the stimulus and the response. So before anything else, before interpretation or insight, in other words, before you could talk to this type of person, we have to start with what we call containment. Just helping him get more regulated, just enough to not be taken over by these feelings. Only then can we start to explore what the emotion is really about. And when he gets into a more regulated state, he starts to recollect his early years. Sometimes these things emerge spontaneously. He tells me that he was a bright kid, but unsupported. No one taught him how to study, how to tolerate frustration, how to keep going when things got hard. So when life asked for more effort, structure, or perseverance, he collapsed. So now at work, that phone rings. It's a small request, but it stirs something old. The helplessness returns. The feeling isn't I'll try, it's I can't. And something is wrong with me. And even underneath that, what we see actually is I won't, because trying and failing feels unbearable to him. He doesn't say those words exactly, but his thoughts and actions speak volumes. This project is stupid, he says. I'm not doing it. Or sometimes we see people withdraw and procrastinate. For this fellow, he would frequently get into trouble at work. Have you or someone you know ever avoided something? Not because it was hard, but because failing felt like it would confirm something awful about you. The inner logic is split: omnipotence or devaluation. The moment a demand evokes frustration, it reactivates early failures that were never metabolized, triggering a spiral of self attack. Healing here isn't about stripping away grandiosity, it's about integration of the fragmented images himself that he has of himself. Healing is about helping him slowly recognize that his anger and the procrastination and the avoidance is a desperate attempt to avoid shame. So, if grandiosity can show up in quiet, defensive ways like this, you might be wondering what else is going on inside somebody like this. Here's the thing: what we see on the surface rarely is the full story. That brings us to something crucial. Grandiosity and vulnerability aren't opposites, they actually coexist. I mean, they are opposites, but they come together. Even if someone seems to dominate in one moment, they're almost always, both of them are at play. See, they trade places, pushing one up while the other one is pushed down. Think about somebody like Tony Soprano, or even more accurate, Kendall Roy from the popular TV series Inheritance. Outwardly, he's all swagger, intimidation, and at times trying to please and be liked. But as soon as something goes wrong or not his way, you almost immediately see the vulnerable side of him and a complete collapse of the grandiosity and arrogance. With Tony Soprano, the tough mafia guy, vulnerability presents itself in several ways, but most obvious is in his panic attacks, the exact issue that brought him into psychotherapy treatment. That's what narcissistic pathology often looks like. It's a constant dynamic tension between feeling inflated and feeling exposed. And this is where psychodynamic work comes in. The goal isn't to eliminate grandiosity, it's to promote self reflection and integration, to help people become aware of these wildly contradictory internal images that they carry. Like I mentioned in that example a moment ago, that I would help him integrate the idealized self versus what? The worthless self, or the perfect other versus the frustrating, disappointing other. Who was the frustrating, disappointing other in that example that I gave? Well, for that fellow, it was the person on the other end of the phone who made the request for him to get some work done. You see, when these parts remain split, unintegrated, they wreak havoc. Emotions and relationships become unstable. Reactions to feedback are intense. Even a basic work request, like taking on a project, can feel threatening. So here's the next big question: what does real change actually look like for someone caught in this grandiose structure? Change starts when a person can begin to recognize and reflect on the contradictory views of self and others that they're carrying around. Not collapse into one or not disown the other, but hold them both together simultaneously. But in order for that to happen, they first need space to think. Not perform, not defend, just for a moment to slow down, to reflect and think. So, what I'm suggesting is healing narcissism, dismantling the grandiose structure, begins in these single moments of reflection. Here's a prototypical example. A patient says, "She didn't text me back. I know she's done with me." Rather than challenging that belief directly, I might initially respond, and this is part of containment. I would reflect back how difficult that sounds, or how disappointing that is, or it seems like you're feeling quite, and I'd have to pick up on the feeling. It could be anxious. Now, depending on what sort of response I get, I might go a little bit further and I might gently add that maybe even rejected. And then if I have their attention, I would say, can we pause and think about this together? Are there any other possibilities here? In other words, could there be any other reason she did not yet return your message? In that moment, I'm helping them shift from certainty to curiosity, from I know to maybe. And by the way, just as an aside, certainty is a very common characteristic of people who have these narcissistic traits. So, this is the beginning of what we call mentalization, the ability to reflect on your own mind and consider that your thoughts and feelings are just one version of reality. And by the way, what sounds like certainty, I know what she meant, or in a prior example, like this project is just stupid, is actually part of the grandiose structure, the structure that knows everything and is always right and correct. So this single interaction might seem simple, but it plants the seed for real change. When a person can pause, stay with the feeling, and begin to wonder what else might be true, they're slowly loosening their grip on the grandiose structure. Progress isn't about dismantling defenses all at once. It's about making space for contradiction. Maybe she's rejecting me, or maybe she's just busy. Maybe I'm not perfect, but that doesn't mean I'm a worthless loser. Maybe I failed this time, but that doesn't mean I'm a complete failure. This captures the shift from all or nothing thinking, which you've probably heard of. This is also what we call splitting. And it really captures how we shift to a more integrated, nuanced self view. Precisely the kind of move, this is the movement actually that weakens the grandiose structure. And that's where growth happens. In these moments when the person begins to see themselves and others through a more flexible and integrated lens. In this kind of space, a person can begin to wonder about those deeper layers, to hold contradictory feelings and even different explanations, different opinions. Can you imagine? So, what happens as the false self, the grandiose structure that has held them together, begins to break down? And how do you stay in that space or help them stay in that space? We'll explore that question in the next video. So if you're interested in learning more about healing narcissism, not by confrontation, but by creating space for reflection, for feeling, and for real change, be sure to subscribe and follow along. Okay, everyone, thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.